Hopefully somewhat dry after getting inside. We have the snow out. But thank you for coming. Tonight we get to hear from a wonderful speaker. Ben Hylden has been traveling around, speaking in a lot of schools, lots of places, sharing his story and his testimony. And so that's what he's going to be talking about tonight. And I just want to say right from the top, if any of you want to give to his ministry and support him, I'm sure after the service they can come up and talk to you, and you have ways that they can do that. If anyone wants to give to his ministry and him traveling around sharing this story on any giving envelope in the seats, just write Ben on the bottom of the envelope, put it in there, and there's a drop box in the back, and we would love to be able to have that opportunity. But what I know is that when you guys hear his story, you're going to be inspired, and your faith is going to be challenged, because I got to watch some of the snippets from your website, some news broadcasts and things after the accident. It's just powerful, and I'm excited now to hear the full story of what God has done in your life. And so, without further ado, everybody, would you put your hands together and welcome Ben Hylden to the stage.
Well, thank you guys. Thanks for having me at the church. This is awesome, and this is what I now love to do. I would say when I was younger, this wasn't what I was good at. I was more so an athlete. I wasn't a big public speaker or sharing my story or my life. So as a kid, for me, life was all about sports. Like, sports was number one, and I grew up on a dairy farm, and I don't know about you guys, but I'm not much of a guy who wants to be milking cows, but that's just me. So that would always get in the way of my dreams for sports, because me and my friends, we had a dream since we were 4 years old to go to state in basketball and win state. And so for me, growing up into my junior high years, when you start being tempted by different temptations into partying and drinking, life got really tough because you'd lose friends. And that's when sports became even more and more important to me. And so at that point, me and my parents' bond started to suffer, because I was so into myself and so into sports that it would make me angry at them, because I didn't want to be on the farm working. And so as I got into high school as a sophomore now, that was kind of when I began to excel in sports and finally do really well the way I wanted to. And so it got to a point with me and my parents that I was yelling at them every single day, and I became so self-centered and arrogant and prideful in every single thing that I was doing. And so I completely lost myself. When I was a kid, I was such a joyful little kid. Like, I actually went out, and every single day I would go look for dinosaur bones and just go out in the field and look for them, because that was what I did. I mean, I was like a 5-year-old, 6-year-old. In the summertime, to me, it was so joyful, so fun. It was so simple, but so fun. And now I'm 16 years old, and that joy, all that is gone. Like, I had lost myself completely. And for me, I didn't even see it though. Like, I was so blind to who I was that I had lost myself. But then on April 6, 2007, that was when everything changed. So I was going into back therapy in my hometown of Park River, and I'd always take this back gravel road that nobody else takes. Like, I was always late for school, so I would always take that same road. And I had never been in an accident. I had never lost control of my car, but on that day it was different. I remember that morning I tried on my suit coat for prom the next weekend, and then I went down that road into Park River, and the road that day was half ice, half gravel, and I lost control on the ice, and my car sometimes would accelerate without me even pushing on the gas. So on that day, that's what it did, and I accelerated, and I went down the ditch. I hit an approach and flipped my car into a field numerous times. I wasn't wearing my seatbelt, So I was ejected out the passenger door going face first into the field. And when my face made impact, that was when everything in my life changed. Like, I had all these dreams, these plans that I had in my life. For me and my friends, we thought at that point we were always a good basketball team, a good football team, and we thought we'd win 2 state championships in basketball, 1 in football. And so that was who I was. That was my identity, was sports. And so at that point when my face made impact, that just completely shattered. I knew internally that life was now different. Like, everything that I had worked for in life was now gone. And I didn't really, I didn't know who I was or what my purpose was. And I laid there in the field, and I guess for me, I started to realize that this is the end of my life. I started to realize that I was suffocating, and it was getting harder and harder to breathe. And what I didn't know is that I had bit through my tongue, and all that blood, I was swallowing it into my lungs instead of my stomach. So I was slowly suffocating. And I laid there, and it was like in a movie, you see where, like, their life flashes before their eyes and their mind, and you're thinking about your entire life and everything that you've done and all the way up to this point and who I've become and how happy I was as a little kid. And now I'm a 16-year-old, and who I am, that I am not the person that I should have been. And so the one thing that really hit me was how I treated my parents. And so I began crawling on my back, hoping that I could get back to the farm, which is a half a mile away. I know deep down I'm not going to get there, but I just wanted to try. I mean, that was all that was left. As I was, getting harder and harder to breathe, I just kept crawling, hoping that I could find my parents to tell them that I loved them, that I'm sorry for how I treated them. And I got to a certain point when I was crawling on my back, and I first heard a woman's voice and then a man's voice. My eyes were swelled shut, so I couldn't see anything. My ears were filled with dirt, so I could faintly hear these 2 people. But in my mind, I called them the 2 nice people, because they were trying to help me, but I didn't know who these 2 people were. And so I laid there, and I could see that they're trying to keep me still. And I remember thinking in my mind, like, thank you guys for trying to help me, but there's nothing that you can do because I'm going to die. And I never thought about death in my life until this point, because, you just don't. When you're healthy and you're breathing and you're doing your everyday activities, you're just not thinking about when you die. And for me as a kid, I grew up in a Christian home, and I would say, if you asked me, Ben, do you believe in Jesus Christ? I would say yes. But I didn't live in my faith. If you were to ask me, like I said, I would say yes. But even when I was laying there, knowing that I'm going to die, I still didn't ask God to save me. And so I just simply didn't know him at that point in my life. And so I took what I thought was my last breath, and it wasn't until later on in life that I experienced what I remembered during those few minutes that I wasn't breathing. And so obviously then I did come back, and I was in transport to All True Hospital in Grand Forks. And going in, I had very, very severe injuries where I had a traumatic brain injury. My brain was bruised and bleeding. My entire face was completely shattered. My nose broke into 9 pieces. The roof of my mouth broke in half. I broke 6 ribs. My kidneys, liver, lungs, small intestines were all bruised or bleeding, and the artery in my right leg was crushed. So at this point, if I somehow did live, the doctors told my parents that I would lose my right leg, I'd lose parts of my organs, and I would be mentally changed for the rest of my life. So I would need a lot of help in school. I would never play sports ever again. I wouldn't be the same person ever again in my life. And that's what the doctors told them at that point. And so first they did surgery on my leg to see if they could save my leg. And they told my parents that there's a small chance that they could save my leg if they found a perfect fit vein. And I still don't understand how I had a vein that wasn't being used at that point, but they found a vein that was a perfect length, and they put it in where that artery was crushed, and they saved my leg. And so that was great. That was awesome. So thankfully I still have my right leg. And next they did exploratory surgery to see how much of each organ they would have to cut out because they were so badly damaged. But to their surprise, they opened me up and they saw the organs live, and they were not what the test showed. Like, they had somehow healed in that amount of time, and in the doctor's words, it was a complete miracle. Where I talked to the doctors before I wrote my book and asked them, about that, and they said, we have no answer. Medically speaking, we have no idea how your organs healed that fast. It's not medically possible. And so that was awesome. I mean, I have all my organs still. And so now they're closing me up, though, and they made one mistake as they're closing me up, and they didn't take away all the air from around my lungs. So when they closed me up, that air pressed against my lungs so hard that my lungs then collapsed, and I was gone for a second time. And so at this point, I was gone now for about 4 to 5 minutes, and they came out and told my parents that if we come back in less than 5 minutes, that your son will be gone for good. And so during that time, I had a family member that got everybody in the waiting room to pray for me, to pray that God would intervene and save my life. And during that time, they found a lung specialist in the hospital, and he came in and told them to put in chest tubes. So they did, and I came back. I was breathing all by machine, 100% oxygen, but I was still alive and still breathing. And so after that, though, my parents, they thought it was great that I was alive, that things were good. Unfortunately, the doctors told my parents that because my lungs had been through so much in the past few hours, that they would have to swell up. And so my accident was on Good Friday. And they said that by Easter, I would essentially die. And they gave me less than a 5% chance to live through those next 3 days. So during those next 3 days, I know I had thousands of people praying for me because I saw the emails, I saw the texts, I saw all the messages. And for me, I didn't deserve to have a second chance. I didn't, deserve to live through what I did. But I believe that because my mom, she slept on a wooden bench every single night in that room with me and prayed and prayed and prayed that I would live. And during those next 3 days, my lungs never swelled up. It was, in the doctor's eyes, and I talked to them about that too, where they said to them that was the greatest miracle, the medical miracle of all, because they said my lungs have to swell up. They have to swell up. But they never did at all, and I kept breathing and kept going until finally the next week I had escaped death fully, they said, and I was moved to room 302. I came out of my coma, and now was when my own journey that I remember started. And so for me, coming out of the coma, I was told about everything, about the accident, and it was shocking because you never think in your own mind that you're going to be in an accident. It's always going to be somebody else. And then when it's you, you're just dumbfounded. And so for me, I knew everything had changed, that the doctors told me that I wouldn't play sports ever again. I would need help in school, and so at that point I couldn't talk, I couldn't eat, I couldn't walk. And so I laid there listening, and they were saying that, that I was more than likely mentally changed. But I'm like, guys, I can hear you, and I'm still me. I'm still Ben. Like, I'm going to come back this very next year, and I am going to play basketball. Like, I will. And that was my belief. Like, that was my true belief that no matter what was in my way, I was going to come back. And there was this power, this strength inside me that I had never had in my entire life until that time when I came out of my coma. And I knew something was different, but I couldn't put my finger on it. But I had this belief that was inside me that was just so strong. And it didn't matter what the doctor said. It didn't matter what anyone thought. All that matters is that I believed that I would come back and I would play. And so coming out of it, my parents told me about the accident. And the thing that shook me the most was that it turned out those two nice people that showed up to find me were my parents. That day, they had a meeting rescheduled 3 times to that day at that very time. They left 5 minutes after me, and they took that same road that I took, which they never do. Like, they still don't. The only times that road is used by them is during harvest or planting or bringing cows to the pasture. And it was in April, so there's neither of them going on. So for them to take that road, there was absolutely no reason for them to do that. And so I asked my dad after the fact, why did you do that? And he told me that he doesn't remember even taking that road, but then recalls just seeing my arm go up. As they're about to drive by, he sees my arm go up in the field, and my mom runs out to see who this person is. And he called 911, and so my mom saw me, but she couldn't recognize me because my face was so distorted and so full of blood and mud that she couldn't even know it was her own son. So she went over and got this coat, and she recognized that this coat was my dad's, but she's like, Ben's at back therapy, so how could this coat be Kenny's? And then she put the coat on me because it was a really cold day. And then she looked down and saw my feet. And if for any parent in here, you probably know your kid's feet. Like you probably do. And my mom knew my feet. And that was the only way that she could recognize me. And then she realized that it was me in front of her. And then that was when I received my first prayer from my own parents. And, they thought that I had died. They thought when my body went limp and I wasn't breathing that I would never come back. And they said I was gone for about 4 to 5 minutes. And then all of a sudden I came back and then I started breathing. And shortly after, the ambulance came, and so that was that. And so for me, hearing that, it was just like something happened, like where something inside me was like, God had a plan in this, like God had a part in this. But for me, I didn't understand it fully at this point in my life. Like there was so much more that I didn't understand. And so going on from there, in a nutshell, my whole goal was to come back and play basketball. That was it. Like that was my motivation, my inspiration every single day. And so I worked and worked all through the summer. I lost 40 pounds in the hospital in those 20 days when I was in there. I was supposed to be in the hospital for a few months, but my mom quit her job so she could take care of me and bring me to therapy in Park River because I wanted to go home. I didn't want to be in the hospital anymore. And so I started out, just working every single day. And, there were days where I wanted to quit. There were for sure days that I wanted to throw in the towel because it was too painful trying to gain back the weight when you can't eat any food at all because my jaw was still broke. It was so hard. But there's always this voice, really, that was inside me that just wouldn't let me quit. it just said, you have to keep going. You can't quit. And so I kept going every single day. And by the first day of school, I was going to school normally. I refused any extra help. And on the first day of basketball practice, I was running, I was jumping, I was playing basketball, and I was doing something that I was told that was absolutely 100% impossible to come back the next year and play. And to me, though, I had that belief. It was just a belief, it was faith that I would come back and I would play the sport that I love. And so I was on cloud nine. Like, my life was back. Like, I was playing basketball, I was going to school, I was my normal self again until the holiday tournament in Park River, where I got elbowed in the nose twice. I got a bloody nose. My parents freaked out. For me, I was like, I'm not quitting basketball. Like, there's no way after all this work that I'm going to quit basketball now. And so I kept playing. I kept going to school. And as the days went on, I got weaker and weaker and weaker, to a point where I had to quit school. I had to quit basketball. And I was literally at home, laying in bed. I couldn't walk anymore. I had double vision again. I was losing all the weight again that I had put on. And I was so baffled. I didn't understand. My mom would always tell me after my accident, I came out of my coma, that God has a plan for me. I'm just like, what plan are you talking about? Like, I lost everything. I'm back to ground zero. And I can't even go to school. I can't play basketball. I can't even walk. And she would still tell me that God has a plan for me. And it was really hard to understand and just to accept that this would be his plan. And so it got to a certain point where I felt so low and so just in a rut that I wanted to take my own life. And so it got to that point where I was seriously considering committing suicide, because I didn't want to go through this pain anymore. I didn't want to live in a life where I didn't know why I even existed anymore. Why am I even here? You know, it just seemed cruel to me that it'd be taken all away again, and I didn't know why. And there was nothing that I could do, and the doctors didn't even know what was wrong with me. So it got to a point where one night I was bawling my eyes out in my room, and my mom walked in, and she just knew right away that I needed help. So then I was brought to the psych ward at Altru Hospital in Grand Forks, and when I walked in there, it was just like I had a moment of clarity where I remembered being 5 years old again, and now being 17, and thinking, how did I get here? I was so happy. I was so full of life and joy and excitement about just being alive. And now I seriously am in a psych ward so that they can watch me so I don't kill myself. And for me, that was a very sobering moment in my life, to see that in front of me, where this is real, this is actually happening, and how did I get here? And then I saw a 5 or 6 year old boy that was over in the corner, and I thought to myself, how could he be in here? That was the age that I was the most happy. And I went over and met him, and as the day went on, I found out why he was in there. And it broke me so much inside that love and compassion showed up, and my heart went out to him. And for the first time, and I don't know how long at that point in my life, I stopped thinking about myself. I stopped pitying myself and just feeling bad for myself. And it was a moment where there was finally light inside me again, where I was thinking about someone else. And it was just like a medicine, where that depression just went away, and I was alive again. I was inspired. I was motivated to come back again, to play basketball again, to live my life to the very fullest. And so the next day they found out that I had post-concussion syndrome, and the only aid to that is just to go home and to rest. And so that's what I did, And the same thing happened again that on that summer where I worked and worked and worked and came back the very next year, going to school, playing basketball. My life was great, and I was loving it. I was loving it until I had this pain in my arm that would not go away, and it was like making crunching noises. So I knew I should go in, even though I didn't want to, because I knew they would say I have to quit for a while, whether I didn't know what it was. And so I went in, and they said I had the worst case of tendonitis before surgery. So I took a month off from basketball, and in my first game back, I was so pumped. Like I was so excited to play because I thought in my own mind this was the time that I would come back and play. It would work out. We would go to state that year, and this was my old class's last chance. So I had to redo my junior year because I had to quit school. So it's their senior year. We're rated number 1 in state. And so for me, it was just like, this is it. This is what we've been working for since we were 4 years old. And in the first game back, I remember running down past half court, and I was wearing a face mask, I remember too. So there's 2 places on my head that can be hit, my 2 temples where I can be injured. And I got hit in the left temple or elbowed there, and I was immediately knocked out, and I was ambulanced to Altru Hospital, and it was this. I remember being in the ER, wondering what is going on. I had to quit basketball for the year. It was done, and I didn't understand. I just simply didn't understand my own life. Like, why is this happening to me? And my mom was there. She was holding my hand, I remember, and she said to me that God has a plan for you. And I just, Mom, I don't even know what to say to you. Because, I mean, how could this be a plan? How could this make any sense of the imagination? I mean, it seems cruel that this could be a plan. But I remember I left there because she looked at me and in a very serious look, she said, God has a plan for you. And so I left there, and I honestly had the belief that God has a plan for me, even though I was like, how could this be a plan? But he's got to have a plan. And so I left there with inspiration again to try one more time to come back and play basketball. And so the next year, I was in the best shape of my life. And in a scrimmage before the season, I got elbowed in the head a tiny bit. It didn't affect me physically, but it popped a question in my head that asked me, is sports worth it? And I wanted to say yes, but I knew the answer was no, because the doctors told me that if I got one more concussion too soon, that I could be damaged mentally for the rest of my life. So the next day, I brought my shorts and my jersey in, and I quit. And for me, my identity as a person was to be an athlete. I mean, that's all I knew. And so this for me was big. It was something that I couldn't imagine doing, but there was a new belief in me that one day I am saving myself for something bigger and better in life. And I was okay with it. I was at peace quitting. It was weird because I had worked since I was 4 to play this sport, but I finally realized that there's more to life than just sports. And so that was when my faith began to really take off. And so my last year at Bible camp as a camper, I remember we're in the chapel and we're all singing, and this is in front of girls too, and I began crying. And it's like, oh my gosh, like all the girls are looking at me, why is Ben crying? So it was really embarrassing. And so I went in the back pew and I kept crying and crying, like, why am I crying? And it was a moment of clarity, of like, I understood who has been carrying me, who was that strength, who was that power inside me from day one coming out of my coma, and finally realized that It was my faith in Jesus Christ, that it is God. And to know, to understand, to have that clarity, it was so powerful that it was a crossroad in my life, definitely. It was a place where I went in the right direction full out, where I wanted to really truly live for God for the first time in my life. And so it was the first time also that I wanted to share my story, because if you knew me back then, you would know that I had a speech impediment. So I would stutter all the time, and it was super embarrassing. And so talking in front of people is something I couldn't do. There's just no way. And now I have the inspiration to go in front of my own friends and all these girls, and I'm like, I'm gonna stutter. I can't talk in front of people. And so that night at campfire, I shared my story, but I never stuttered. And to me personally, that was a miracle, because I can't do that. I simply just, I couldn't, I get too nervous and then stutter, and then it, gets worse. And so for me, from then on, it was, I had this want to share my story, and I didn't know what God wanted to do with it, but I just felt like there's a part of me that I'm supposed to share my story in this life. And so going on from there into college, I would say my life in college was a normal college student, where it was a battle. It was a battle of good and evil, where I would fall into temptation. It was slow but sure. I started out wanting so badly, just to stay close to Christ, to not lose my faith, to not lose my straight and narrow path. But it's just like, no matter how much I tried, no matter what I did, I was so weak on the inside that I would slow but sure fall into it. Like I didn't even know what I was doing. And then once I'm in it, I don't know how to get out. And so it got to a point where I didn't feel like I was deserving to be forgiven. And so one night when I'm taking a girl home from a Sioux hockey game, I was driving her home, and I liked her a lot. So this is not something you want to do in front of her. And I started crying. And I'm like, oh my gosh, why am I crying? Why am I crying? This makes no sense at all. And so I dropped her off. She had no idea why. And I went back to my dorm, super embarrassed. And I woke up the next morning, and there was this image in my head that would not go away. And it was so bizarre, because I'm like, I can't even make up this image. Like, what is this image? And the image it was like a vision in front of me. And it was me, but I was remembering this at the same time. And it was me in the field with my dead body in the field. And I was looking at it. And as the day went on, it was like a puzzle was being put together. And I remembered everything from the moment that I took my last breath and what I experienced during those few minutes that I was gone. And what I remember was I took that last breath, and instantly I'm in this new world. And there's no more color, though. There's still the trees in the background, there's still the field, but there's no more color. And I'm sitting there standing there looking at my dead body, and I remember thinking, this is what it's like to die? Like, there's got to be more than just me standing here looking at my dead body. And what seemed like a few minutes passed by, a man appeared. He didn't walk up, but he just simply appeared to the left of me. And the man, the first thing that I saw was his face, though. I couldn't actually see it, but his face was so bright. So I remember shielding it with my hand, because it hurt my eyes to look at it. And he was wearing a super white robe, the whitest of white robes that you'd ever see, with a gold rope around it. And it looked like he had like brown hair, kind of shoulder length, and his skin was like it was bronze. Now that man didn't look at me standing there. He didn't talk to me. He didn't acknowledge me. He just stared at my dead body in the field, and he stuck out his hands, and he raised them up a tiny bit, and this gold light came from his hands, and my body raised off the field about, I would say, like, I don't know, 6 inches, and that same light came from underneath my dead body, and he put my body back down on the field, and instantly I am back into this world, back to all the pain and the blood and the mud and the field. But the one difference that I had was that I had hope and I had belief that I would survive no matter what obstacle was in my way. And one day I would share this story, and I would testify what I saw and what I experienced. And so from then on, after that in college, just experiencing that and reliving that, having that flashback, I mean, it changed me immediately. So my faith was back. I was on cloud 9 again. I was pumped to now counsel at the Bible camp, and so that was me during the summer. And going into my sophomore year, you'd think that after seeing something like that, it would be easier then to stay away from temptation because you've seen this and you know. And for me, during that time, I also remember thinking, why did I doubt? As a kid, as I grew up, actually, as I got into like 10, 11, 12, I started to doubt. I started to doubt about Christ and about God, and then seeing that man, I just asked myself, why did I doubt? And, so going into my sophomore year, it was the exact same thing, where it was, I wanted so bad to stay close to God. So I put up like Christian posters. I was listening to Christian music. I was going to church. I was reading my Bible. I was praying. And it was just like, I'm so weak. I'm so weak as a human that I'm trying so hard to be good, to follow the rules. And I can't. I always fall. And then once I fall, it's easier to fall the next time. And during that year, I got to a certain point where it was the anniversary of my accident of that year. And I remember waking up, and I just remember that morning, I just started crying. I was lost. I wanted to come back home. I wanted to come back to my Creator. I wanted to be on that straight and narrow path again. I wanted to be washed and just, be just free of my sin, because I felt so guilty every single day. And it was the first time in my life that I ever was inspired to pray, to please God, to take away my work, take away like my trying, and just please help me, change me, transform my heart, transform my mind into just being obedient, to not even wanting to go out, to not even wanting to party, to drink, to all those temptations. I mean, I knew I couldn't do it. I knew I was way, way too weak. And it was the first time that I ever truly gave it to Him to just change me, to internally transform me. And so after that day, I mean, after I cried out to Him, it was like everything changed. Everything changed from then on. Going into the summer, I don't know, I had a new joy, a freedom inside me where I just didn't care what people thought anymore. I didn't care to go out. I didn't care to drink. I didn't care to meet any girls. And it was like I was a new person. And so going into my junior year, I had the exact same thing. It was so easy to just stay in on the weekends and to not go get drunk. And it was amazing. It was truly, to me, a pure, but I thought, a miracle. But it was simply God answering a prayer of one of His children, and it'd be the exact same for any one of you. And so during that year, my faith was good. It was strong. And it was 2 weeks before I was going to be a guest on a radio show. And I was driving back to Grand Forks, and I took the same road I had my accident on, which makes no sense because I'm actually backtracking from Grand Forks. Like, I'm going the opposite way. And I remember thinking to myself, like it was like I woke up while I'm driving down that road. Like, why am I going down this road? This is the wrong way. And so I was gonna turn around, but then I kept driving, and I got to the field where I had my accident, and I started crying, and I got harder and harder of crying, and where I was bawling my eyes out, and I'm like, oh my gosh, something is going to happen. Like God's going to show me something, or I just knew internally that something's going to happen spiritually. And so I put the car into park, and I just waited for something to happen. I knew it was going to happen, but it was a matter of time, so I just sat there, and I looked out my front windshield just waiting, and it was just like the first time. The first thing I remember was that same man that saved me in the field, but now I could see his face, and he was smiling at me. And he had his left arm extending like this, going forward, and as his arm went forward, the city appeared. So I stopped at a certain point, and he was in front of me. And as his arm went forward, the city appeared, and I started crying even harder because I had felt like I don't deserve to see what I'm seeing. Like, this is too magnificent. Like, this is insane. And the city had these huge walls around it, and they were all made of different jewels. And the gates they went in, and they were made out of jewels, but I have no idea what jewels. And the buildings in the city, it looked like they were made out of like white jewels. The guy didn't tell me what they were, but that's just what it looked like. And there's a mountain way in the background, and there's a tree line up to a certain point, and then it stopped. And there was a river going down the middle of the mountain going into the city, and there was lightning and thunder way in the background on top of the mountain. But the whole city, though, was still engulfed with light at the exact same time. And so it was absolutely, to me, just insane. It was absolutely insane that I'm looking at this. And I didn't see any people in the city, but just saw what I saw, and it was amazing. And then as time went on, once again, it was like a puzzle was being put together in my mind as a vision. And I remember walking with that man, and I was on the right, and he was on the left. And I remember walking with him and looking up at him because he was so tall. And my guess is that he was about 8 feet tall. And he was the most beautiful being that you'd ever see in your entire life. Like, perfect. His voice was perfect. And he was simply sharing with me why my life was being saved. And it was being saved to simply share my story and to share the gospel of Jesus Christ. And it was amazing to me because I am now, or that I had remembered what had happened to me during those 4 to 5 minutes on the operating table. And so it was to me very, very life-changing. And then I shared that on the radio show in the next 2 weeks. And after that, it was I got the idea to write a book from the host. And so for me, I thought, well, that's a cool idea, but I'm not a good writer. I'm not. I don't have the gift to write. So I thought that it would be cool to write a book about my story and what I have experienced, but I just can't. I'm a full-time student at UND. I have 2 jobs, and I want a social life. And so I just said, cool idea, but I can't. And so I went to my room after that. I went back home to my room, and I walked to my room, and it was just like a light turned on inside me that said, you're going to write the book. And I was then inspired at that moment to write down my story. And so that was the night I started writing, and I didn't stop until I was done, it was the next year on April 6th where the book came out. And for me, it was a pure miracle because I'm not a good writer. I'm also not a good speaker. Like I said, I had a speech impediment. And so this, to me, is impossible. But, when God inspires you, you can really do anything. With Him, anything is possible. And so from then on, after the book released, I started getting calls to come speak and share my story at different churches and schools. And so it's been going on since it came out like 7 years ago, and this is what I've continued to do. And for me, it's awesome for me to share it and to see how it impacts other people, because we all go through different trials in life. Everybody goes through hardship. They're just different. They're unique. We're all individuals, but we all need inspiration in our life. And so for me, to share my struggles, my mistakes, and my redemption from my own sin and from my own struggles, it's awesome. Honestly, it's fun because it shows the power of God, and it shows His forgiveness, and it shows His love. And so I would say for me, the most important thing that He has taught me, which is the foundation of all of our lives, and it always should be, is to believe in Jesus Christ and to love your neighbor. And so for me, that is what He tells me every single morning. And that is what you lay your foundation on. And everything else you do after that will be beautiful. Everything that you do will be powerful. Everything you do will be enjoyable and fun. And you'll have a purpose in life, because you'll be loving your neighbor, you'll be glorifying God, and living in faith. And you can't beat that. You can't go wrong. And so that's what I want to end with. I hope you guys were impacted in some way by my story. This is always, like I said, it's an awesome, awesome thing doing this. And I just want to thank you guys for coming out. Even though you didn't know me, you still came and to hear it. And so I just thank you for that. And I'll be in the back if you guys have any questions. So thank you. Yep.
Wasn't that powerful? So cool. Thank you so much, Ben, for sharing your story and being obedient. It's actually kind of cool today in church. If you go to our church, if you don't go to our church, welcome. We're happy to have you. But just this morning, we were talking about how all of us are called to testify about Jesus, which is what? To share what we have seen and what we've experienced. And that was our challenge this morning. And you came. I didn't know how your story ends or anything, but God just aligned it that all of you are meant to testify about Jesus, which you don't need to memorize the New Testament. All you have to do is be willing to share what you've seen and what you've experienced, because all of you have a story. And so thank you so much, Ben. Can we just thank him one more time for sharing? That was just powerful, incredible. And like he said, if any of you want to come talk to him, all of his books and things are right behind the sound booth back there. You guys can purchase one of those if you would like. And again, if any of you would like to donate to him and allow him to travel around and share this story in churches and schools, you can do that through any giving envelope and just put it in the drop box in the back. But thank you, everybody, so much. Please go up and talk to him. Thank him for sharing. Tell him what God spoke to you while he was sharing. And have a great night. God bless you, everybody.